Recording.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Self-Publishing Podcast. Dave, a last-minute entry there. We decided to go ahead and make the decision to just go ahead and start recording.
He just scooted in right before the bell.
That's good, though, because my something cool, I think, is something that Dave is... I wanted to hear Dave's response on this. So
Mine too. Mine too. So, but I want to hear Dave. What's Dave's something cool? Is it that... I don't know. Look how angry he looks. There's been a lot of just
random bulletins in the channel recently, and they come with no explanation here. It's like, boom, here's something to look at. Drop mic.
Yeah, I don't think the last time Dave's actually given commentary with one of his links. They really are just, here you go, fuckers.
Because I'm posting from inside the news app to Slack, and it doesn't give me an option to also post a comment unless I go in there.
That's annoying.
Now, I read it as ominous. It's just like, this requires no explanation. All you need to go is go to the link.
Well, you don't understand. The problem is you.
For me, it puts it off because I can't just there's just a random link. Why am I clicking on that? So I have to do it at the end of the day. Now I'm collecting all Dave's links and just clicking on them one by one. Where if I have some
go
context,
to them immediately.
I know. Okay, should I fit that into my day right now? Today I got a medley. We got Louis C.K.'s apology, and we got new Eminem. It was a good day.
All right, so we have our guest Jason Pinter coming on in 5 minutes. So let's do something cool quickly. I will go first. I was getting yes, I was having some blood drawn, and I was waiting in the waiting room.
While you had an enema?
No, the TV. Yes, at the same time. They just had the TV on, and I was waiting and stuff. And so I go over, and because I couldn't
use needles in my doctor.
I just saw the screen, and I had to go over and listen real close because the volume's low. Because I was just like, "What the fuck?" So this is actually something. What the fuck? It's not really something cool.
We should have what the fuck.
It was this story where, and it was on the news, right? So it was like a legit thing where apparently, I hope people have heard about this. Apparently, Facebook is trying some new program where you can. The idea is to prevent people from, I guess, sharing embarrassing photos of you or whatever. So they want you to upload your racy photos that was the word it was, so that if somebody tried to do it again, that they can pattern match them. I'm like, I'm sorry, did Facebook just ask for my porn? What? Are you kidding me?
That sounds like a scam.
That sounds like a story. Dave, you want to write this?
And I'm just imagining the guys at Facebook going,
I think you just got
if we
fished.
find a reasonable reason for them uploading their naked pictures, we can get them to do it.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. I do think there's a good Dark Crossing story there.
So that's it. There's no more to it. I just thought it was, what the fuck, Facebook? Facebook also wants you to email in your social security number and bank card numbers. So if one of them's lucky, they'll give you a prize.
All PIN numbers, right?
Yes.
Dave, what's your cool?
My something cool is I'm caught up on Mr. O, but I think it's only 4 episodes in. Wow, that show just gets better and better every episode.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the new season. Mine is working with so we had our first. We're calling it the Brainstorm, and we do it every week with all of our outliners, and we're basically making up our stories. So we'll have a cover and we'll brainstorm it, and now a lot of this basically breaking down story has moved to Slack. So all the outliners are asking questions to each other, and it's just really, really fun to watch all the story craft happening and to be brainstorming live. Although I do have a funny story about Dave and his unwillingness to participate for another time. But
we already talked about it.
Did we? It's a good subject. But this was from some of the brainstorming earlier this morning, and I just really enjoyed this, so I'm going to read it out loud. And it just tells you, we have such a great group of outliners, and these are people who are not only really good with story, but they're really good with our culture, and they just really fit, which makes it fun to tell stories with them. So this is live from Slack. Somewhere in the galaxy, there are several alien races battling for dominance, but one of these groups has been a pacifistic society for a long time, existing in a semi-dream state of peace.
You're giving away the ideas, man.
That's what I was thinking.
No.
Hype up.
They've made an impressive amount of technological advancements, but they're not prepared for the war they are facing from conquerors. Working name, perhaps the conquering aliens are called, I don't know, the Dave. The nice guys can be called Panarins. the Panarins need to find a way to beat the Dave. Anyway, it goes on and on and on. But I just love that Panarins and the Dave are, storytelling elements that not only can be used, but everybody in the Slack channel totally gets right. They get the Panarins.
I take exception to that. I am the nice guy. Thank you.
No. See,
Just
Dave. This is the nice guys.
This isn't the moment in Falling Down where Dave realizes that he might be the bad guy.
No, I am the good guy.
Oh, so yeah, Panarins versus the Devarians. It's going to be really good. So yeah, I think we will work on those name changes. But I do like that everybody immediately knew that the Panarins were the fancy guys. They were the good guys.
Wow. Dave, you have one? Oh no, you did yours. Okay, so I
can add on to that if you want.
I think we were trying to race through because
we were trying to race through them. Let's go back to Facebook wanting your porn.
I did think
one of the cool things I love about Mr. Robot though is their use of music. It is by far the best in any television show. They use like these little like stuttering, glitchy sorts of sounds and stuff. It's just fucking awesome, and it really like adds to the sense that the main character is like losing his mind, and it's just so awesome. And there are 4 albums of music right now for Mr. Robot. I listened to it on Apple.
Well, are they playlists or they're actual like albums. Soundtracks?
It's soundtracks.
Wow, that's cool.
Although they don't have all the music from the shows, unfortunately. I wish they did. They need to release more albums.
I was gonna say, isn't 4 albums like how many seasons have there been? Not many, right? 2,
3, or I think they're on the 3rd or 4th right now. I don't remember.
I think the 3rd.
Okay.
There's so 2 albums per season is not enough for you.
No, they're on the 3rd season now, and no, that's not enough. It doesn't cover all.
But the 3rd season just started. There'll be 6 before it's over, won't there be?
I want more.
Wow, Dave is never satisfied.
Just like my mother.
Can that be the episode, the title of Worst Show Ever this week?
I was going to suggest that. Hello, Jason.
Hello, we're on air.
Hello.
Hey
guys.
Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So Dave has all of your info, so I'm handing over the mic metaphorically to Dave at this point. Here it is.
Okay.
All right. Hello. We're welcoming Jason Pinter. He is his most recent book is The Castle, which I started reading this week, and I really like it a lot. It's it's a thriller. Ripped from the headlines thriller. You're taking that Law and Order's thing there.
You got to do the dun dun
dun dun.
Now, originally, Jason, he's traditionally published. He got a 7-book deal after his first book, and he's worked for a bunch of different publishing houses. And then he started his own publishing company, Polis Books. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
And he's written a bunch of stuff, and I got a ton of questions for you. So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks a ton.
So tell us about your beginnings. You had editorial and marketing jobs at Warner Books, Random House, St. Martin's Press, and others. And then you wrote your first book. Was that The Mark, the first book?
Yeah, The Mark was the first one. Yeah.
Okay, and then you got the 7-book deal. So what was that like?
It wasn't 7 all at once. It was 3 and then 4. It was a 3.
Oh, forget it. We don't want you on that. 7 was more impressive story.
It'd be funny if it was just 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and 1, actually. But no, yeah. So it was a 3-book deal originally, and then pretty soon after the first one came out, it had been doing pretty well. Just based on the timeline, I think I'd either finished the 3rd one or had written a pretty detailed outline for it. And we went to them, and they said, we want to lock you up for the next few years. And they had me on kind of a bit of a hamster wheel. I was doing 2 books a year. So it was a 7-book deal, but it was actually only about 3.5 years or so, which if you're also working full time, I guess it was kind of tough. But yeah, I mean, that happened right around probably when I was like 27 or so. And yeah.
Yeah, they also wanted to lock Dave up for the next few years.
I hope he has a better lawyer than I do then.
So, okay. So what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of writing series books?
I think especially, so it's actually funny we sort of got back onto those books because I just actually got the rights back to those books.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that a little bit later because I noticed none of them were on Kindle, and I was kind of annoyed. So you want to talk about that first?
If you notice now, I think out of the 5, 3 or 4 of them are up for pre-order. The other one should be up, and then a box set 2 should be up imminently. So they actually should be up now for pre-order. But I'd been fighting for a while to get them back, actually. So I think, especially in regards to self-publishing, doing a series is hugely beneficial because just the speed in which people read, they want to finish a book and go right into the next one, and to have that many books available at a given time is really exciting for me. I do think it can be, in terms of traditional publishing, it can be both a blessing and a curse. The books I was signed up for were series. So on one hand, you're going to have, I guess what Stephen King calls kind of your constant reader, the people who want to read, but at the same time, you're sort of locked into not doing anything else. Whereas right now, I can kind of do whatever I want. But when you're locked into a series, if there are certain people that aren't reading the series, if they didn't read book 1, they're probably not going to jump into book 5. Right. So I think a series, I mean, granted, if you're Michael Connelly, a series is phenomenal, but if you're sort of like still making your bones a little bit, it can be a little bit limiting.
Now, do you write them where they're all standalone, like where you could conceivably jump in, or are they to be continued?
It's a little of both, which probably means I didn't do it as well as I could have. Put it this way, they're not Lee Child in the sense where you can pick up literally any book and dive in sight unseen. There are plot lines and things in book 5 that relate to book 1. I try to make it so that you don't have to have read book 1, but I'll mention, hey, my character is Henry Parker. Hey, Henry was thinking about this that happened to him a couple years ago. So I'll try to make it easy for somebody to dive in, but at the same time, you might get a better experience if you read book 1 and then continued on to book 5. So I try to make them available, easily digestible standalones, but at the same time, it's sort of like I do think you would enjoy it a little bit more if you did read them first 1 to 5.
Now, do you ever wish that you? Sorry, Dave. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the challenges Sean and I have had. The guy who just interrupted me. We came up doing serials. And then we just started a standalone thriller series, but we realized we have some pretty big plot twists in book 1 of No Justice, and you can't go to number 2 without reading book 1, or you're screwed.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing when I was writing book 2. It's like, how can I write book 2? Given the cataclysmic events of book 1, how can I not mention that in book 2? And Lee Child sort of has it perfected where Reacher goes to a town, causes all sorts of mayhem, blows everything up, and then literally just moves on to the next town. And it's phenomenal.
Reset button.
Yeah, exactly. That's literally it. And the gimmick is that he shows up with a toothbrush, and that's pretty much it. So I grew up loving sort of like TV shows like The Wire and The Shield and Sopranos, which are more serial. And I feel like you get a deeper sense of the characters and the story if it does continue from book to book. So I really enjoyed that. And I think at the end of book 5, the experience is that much more satisfying if you actually did read all 5.
What were you going to say, Sean?
Oh, well, really much of what you were going to say, that, we've had that difficulty, and it's finding that line, because you want to satisfy the story for sure, but you also want to satisfy the commercial potential of the series. And any time you have a series, the more roads that you have into that series, the easier it is to promote. And Lee Child has just nailed that because anytime one of those books is on sale, you can come, I don't remember when I went into that series, and I didn't go too deep. I think I read maybe 2 or 3 of them, but it didn't matter. I was in the middle, and I knew that I'm reading James Bond, essentially.
Exactly.
There is no...
It's like once in a blue moon, there are a couple of the Lee Child books that are like prequels that sort of try to set up where Reacher came from, but you don't need to have read those at all. I think on the TV side, like Law and Order does it perfectly, where you can jump in every episode and have
right. It's the same but different.
Yeah, but at the same time, like maybe you'll jump in and it's like, oh, Benson has a boyfriend in this episode. She didn't in the last one, and that's pretty much it.
But they're
This
not.
must have been before she found out he was a murderer.
Exactly.
These are like, but they're shallow things, right? They're not like deep things. And we
the kid in this one. I don't remember that.
We tried really hard to construct our series that way from the beginning, and we were like a third of the way through. And I mean, Dave and I don't have an ability to apparently not overcomplicate it. And sure enough, the first book, you kind of have to know some things in the first book to truly get the second.
So do you when you're ending a book, do you introduce like a twist or a hook in an epilogue or something to get them to the next book?
Yeah, I think I definitely started. I didn't do it quite as much in the first one, only because when I wrote it, I didn't know if it was going to get published. So it was hard to end a book on a cliffhanger, not knowing if there was going to be a book 2. Right. And especially because I wrote these when self-publishing really wasn't an option. The people that self-published when I wrote the Mark, they were sort of like, lugging around a suitcase with copies of their book, trying to sell to everybody on the street. It
Very
wasn't
sad people.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it wasn't like it is now, where it's a business decision, it's an artistic decision. There's a lot more you can do with it. When I was writing this book, it was either you get it published or you cry into your whiskey. So with the first one, I didn't really set up with a cliffhanger. When I got the 3-book deal, I was like, okay, I have a little bit of leeway because I know they're going to keep publishing me. So the second book, it was sort of like it ended in the middle of a conflict. And it was actually between Henry and his girlfriend, where something pretty big happens. And you sort of ended the book going like, oh my God, what's going to happen with them? And you have to read book 3 to find out. And then I remember books 4 and 5 are sort of tied together, sort of like one big plot line over 2 books. And the end of book 4 was like total, complete, shameless cliffhanger, because I knew the story was going to continue in book 5. So book 4 is basically like, he shot the gun, ... It basically like that kind of thing. So I had a little more leeway once I actually knew the books were going to be published.
And did readers get pissed when you started doing the cliffhanger endings?
In a good way, I think, because especially after book 2, where there was a bit of a cliffhanger in regards to the 2 main characters, their relationship. Mm-hmm. And people would email me and not say, that was cheap, that was this. They'd email and say like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Why did he make that decision? What's going to happen? It was more like that kind of thing, where they were invested in the characters and wanted to know what happened next. So they weren't emailing like angry that I sort of pulled the rug out from under them, but just sort of like, I can't, I don't want to wait around for the next book. You have to let me know what happens.
I paid for a whole book. I want the end.
Exactly. So I think when I was getting those emails, like what happens next, I knew that I'd done something right, hopefully.
So early on, you had back of the book quotes from James Patterson, Tess Gerritsen, Lee Childs, and Jeffrey Deaver. How did the publisher get all those quotes for you? Like,
I got them.
How'd you do it?
Yeah.
And how can we do it?
That's way more impressive, by the way.
Yeah. I think they, out of all the ones I got for my books, they maybe got like 1 or 2 of them, and the rest were me. So I have a bit of an in the fact that I when I was writing these books, I was an editorial assistant in publishing, but I really made an effort to sort of get involved in the mystery and thriller community. So I was going to Thriller Fest. I was going to BoucherCon, which is sort of the big crime fiction convention. I was very active. Social media wasn't what it is now, but I was blogging. I was reviewing. I was one of the first people who worked in publishing to actually have a blog. And just by virtue of that, I met a lot of these folks. So when I got the book contract, sort of like my marketing brain immediately turned on. It's like, okay, I need to go out and try to solicit some blurbs. So all the folks I got, I'd either met or had corresponded with to some extent. I'd either, met them at a conference, had a beer with them, done something along the lines to the point where if I dropped them a line like, hey, would you mind taking a look at my new book? They'd at least know who I was.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think it helped the fact that I was on the younger side. I think I was like 27 when I wrote the first book or something like that. So I think there's a little bit of like, hey, help the young guy because, we're all, older dudes. We want another generation. I think that helped me a little bit. Other than that, it was really just being visible and talking to people and sort of not being afraid to make a fool of myself and go up to somebody at like the bar and say, hey, I'm Jason. I'm a I'm a new writer and you're awesome. And that that was pretty much it.
Now, do you think there's any for like an older author, do you think it's a little bit more difficult? Either A, they'd be seen as competition, or B, they'd be seen as like, oh, you're too late. You should have been doing this a long time ago.
Not necessarily. I'll give you an example. So I run Polis Books, which is an independent publishing house, and we I want to say 2 years ago published a debut novel by a woman named Patricia Abbott, and it was her debut novel, and she's I think 65, 66.
Oh, that's cool.
And her second one came out last year and was nominated for an Edgar Award. So, I remember actually the very first writers conference I ever went to, the keynote speaker was Frank McCourt of Angela's Ashes. And Angela's Ashes was his first book, and I don't think he published it until he was like 68.
Yeah.
So I actually get asked that a lot if I speak on panels by authors who might be on the older side, however you want to, define that. Am I too old to be an author? And I say, listen, like I'm publishing authors who are writing their first books in their 50s and 60s. Not that obviously Frank McCourt might be an outlier, but at the same time, like when you're submitting a book to an editor or an agent, they're not asking for headshots. They want a book that blows them away. So I don't, if you're James Patterson, you're not like, oh my God, that guy's going to be competition, because realistically, like,
yeah, he has no.
Yeah.
Where they work for him.
I think it just works.
Right. If he has competition, he just eats them.
Exactly. Yeah.
Here, let's share the cover.
Or hey, you're too good. I'll pay you money to ghostwrite my next book.
Right.
Yes.
Take you off the shelves. Yeah. I'll lock you up. I think it helped the fact that I was just a little precocious and unafraid to like make a fool out of myself. And that's not to say somebody in their 30s, 40s, 50s can't do the same thing. I think it just, for whatever reason, worked out in my favor. But there are a lot of authors out there who get great blurbs without any of that stuff.
So what made you launch Polis Books?
I'd worked in trade publishing my whole career. So I'd worked at Warner Books and Random House and St. Martin's Press, and I did marketing publicity at Grove Atlantic and Sirius Press. And I just sort of always loved the idea of being responsible for what I publish and how it was published, and cover art and marketing. And I also had the virtue when I was at Grove Atlantic working for two of my idols in terms of entrepreneurs in the industry, which were Morgan Entricken, who launched Grove Atlantic, and Otto Penzler, who launched in Sirius Press. And seeing the two of them grow the company from where it was really inspiring to me. And it was sort of like, I was at a point where at the time I wasn't married, I didn't have a family, and I was like, if I'm going to do this, now's the time to do it, because if in 5 years from now, I might not have the opportunity and I might kick myself. So if it fails, but if I'm going to do it, now's the time. And I went out, and I think we launched in late summer 2013, and we're still kicking.
Now, are you publishing, because the Castle wasn't published by Polis Books?
No.
So are you doing your own books through Polis?
I am not, because I didn't want Polis to be seen as sort of like a vanity press.
Okay,
I didn't want people to think I was using the company's resources for my own benefit. So it was a very conscious decision to not do my books through Polis, especially because like we publish a fair amount of authors. I didn't want our authors to think they were competing for attention with my own stuff, because who's going to win that battle, So it was very on purpose that I sort of set up a side imprint called Armina Press, which I'm doing all my stuff through.
Okay, so when you started Polis, were you still under contract with the publishing company you were with before?
It's actually a harder question than it sounds, only because the short answer is yes. But the books that I published had nothing to do with Polis. So me setting up Polis wasn't a conflict with my publisher, because I wasn't. If I set up Polis and started publishing myself while I was under contract, that would be a problem. But at the same time, there were contractual issues with my previous publisher that really did become a major issue, and is part of the reason I actually just got the rights to my previous books back. So even though I was under contract, there were some issues between me and my previous publisher that made me want to get my rights back. And it was about a 2-year process to do that, to get my rights back. And it literally just went through about a week ago.
Yeah, I think the fact that they didn't have your ebooks is all
well,
the
they
reason.
did. No, they did.
Oh, they did at one time?
So
okay.
If you went, they literally got taken down like last week.
Oh, okay. All right.
So that's why. So the ebooks literally got taken down last week, and I've since then spent the past week just getting covers made up, reformatting everything. So I mean, if you go onto like Amazon right now, I think you'll see maybe 4 of them are available for pre-order. And I think they're supposed to come out next week. So they were available in ebook, but they literally just got taken down like last week, and I've been dying for that to happen so I could redo them myself.
So what do you guys specialize in at Polis? And what strengths do you have as a smaller publishing company versus the giant monoliths?
We have a pretty strong mystery and crime fiction line, so a lot of mysteries and thrillers, and I think that's by virtue of the fact that it's what I wrote and it's sort of like the community that I'm most familiar with. So when I launched the company, I knew a lot of authors, I knew a lot of the agents, and there were a lot of really talented authors who had sort of gotten short shrifted by their publishers, who'd been let go for no other reason, the fact that their sales weren't good, like the really talented authors who got great reviews, nominated for awards, but just they were on the mid list, and the mid list was dying. So as soon as I launched the company, I'd have 50 emails from authors I knew and respected being like, hey, I have this new book out, and I also got the rights back to my old books. Do you think we can work together? And if they were good, I could sign them up pretty easily. So we do have a really good mystery thriller list. We do have some other sort of, like I say, popular genre fiction. We do some science fiction. We do some commercial women's fiction. We actually just launched our first nonfiction title, which is actually the new book by Mick Foley, who's a
wrestler.
Mankind.
Yeah, exactly. Mankind. Yeah. WWE Hall of Famer and #1 New York Times bestselling author. So I'd say it's sort of like a lot of mysteries, but then we sort of, one of the beauties of this is that I can sort of do whatever I want to.
So as you are right now in, I guess you'd be sort of hybrid yourself because you're doing it independently. Where do you see like the future going for independent and traditional publishing?
Yeah. I love the fact that authors can really have their careers in their own hands now with self-publishing. I know so many authors who, like I said, were sort of left on the scrap heap for for reason that had nothing to do with their talent. And now they have the ability to get their books out there. It's becoming harder for traditional publishers because the space in bookstores is shrinking. If you walk into a Barnes & Noble, half the store is taken over by toys and games.
You've got like the book section and then the board game section.
Exactly. Or God, like how many Funko, toys do you need?
Right.
And if you go into Amazon, it's sort of a bit of a meritocracy where there isn't really, publishers do pay for co-op, but at the same time, it's not nearly the degree it is at a normal bookstore. The one thing I love is that apparently independent bookstores are doing really well. I think independent bookstore sales have risen every year for the past few years. And that was after a few years of it being pretty touch and go. So I like to think there's room for the independents. I think the big chain bookstores are hurting. Sort of like Amazon's doing to them what they did to the independents 10, 20 years ago. But at the same time, I'm curious to know whether self-publishing has sort of hit a bit of a tipping point where there's just so much coming out now. How do you get noticed?
Right.
The people who started doing it 4, 5, 6 years ago, they were sort of like the trailblazers a little bit, and they were big fish in a small pond. Now there are 10 million fish in a giant pond, and they're all trying to get noticed. So that's sort of a big question: is how, if you're going to self-publish and you're talented, how do people find out about your book? And then it's down to marketing, because you could write the best book in the world, but if people don't know about it, what are you going to do?
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing a market correction, and it takes years and years because before there was, so much. There was a lot of junk out there, and now it's not that there isn't. There's still junk out there, but there are devoted readers who are finding their new favorite indie authors, and it's becoming a much more competitive space. The saturation is confusing, but ultimately good because, fast forward a few years and there's going to be a few like huge indie authors that are right up there with the traditional, and it's just changing the landscape. And indies have to work a little bit harder to get noticed, but that's both a craft and a marketing thing. I think I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think what'll be interesting is I wouldn't be shocked if at some point over the next few years, a pretty major best-selling author will start to go indie. because if they already have a built-in audience, like I'm using this hypothetical, let's say like a Michael Connelly. I don't think he'll ever will because he's got a great setup going on. But if he decided to go indie, he's got however many millions of fans already there. And if he can make more money per book, maybe he won't sell quite as many books, but he'll make more money per book. And I think that'll be interesting is when some major best-selling authors say, hey, I'm going to try going indie. Will that then trigger a bit? And if it works, will that then trigger a tidal wave of other big name authors who try to do the same thing? And I think
it almost seems like it has to come from like one layer below, because a guy like anybody who is one of the big names, they've got a really good gig, right? They may not want to go out and figure out how to do the indie game. Yeah, they'll sell more and make more per book or whatever the argument is.
Books in airports, though.
Right. It's the idea that they just they submit their books and then there's this whole other machine that's been operating for decades on their behalf.
Yeah.
That's a harder argument. But somebody who is right at the edge and they're doing really well, but they're not a huge name like that, and they do have an audience, and like they seem really ripe to go ahead and take this and change it for all of us.
Yeah, the folks who hit number one regularly, there isn't much of a benefit, but folks who are like, maybe scraping the list here or there, or maybe just below that, there can be, and it has happened where authors who are sort of like have maybe hit the bestseller list, but maybe are like netting 10,000, 15,000 copies, which is respectable, but not,
it's close enough to smell it, but not to actually experience the success.
If you say, hey, I can sell 10, 15,000 on my own, make more money per book, and do it the way I want to, do it more frequently. I mean, one of the things that when you're traditionally publishing is that generally you're limited to a book a year, just because authors don't, if you're only selling 10, 15,000 copies, why are they going to saturate the market? But if you can write faster, there's that audience, I think, exists more in ebook than it does in print, possibly.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think that the focus a few years ago was on marketing. You've got to be a good marketer. You've got to do that. And I think right now in the correction that we're seeing in the marketplace, there's still a focus on marketing as there should be, but there's a heavier focus on craft, which there absolutely should be.
Oh, absolutely.
Because that's who's going to win. When all the dust settles, the author who is going to win is the author who has a really beautiful balance between a well-crafted book that readers love to read and an ability to get it in front of the right eyeballs.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. If you're writing a series and people read the first book and say, hey, this is trash, they're not going to read the next books in the series.
Yeah, you can get people to buy your first book.
Exactly.
But if you don't show up with a story, good luck.
If you throw it out there for 99 cents, then it's like, hey, it's an impulse buy. It's cheaper than a cup of coffee. I'll give it a shot. But if you're not actually hooking them, then it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and that's why free used to work, or 99 cents used to work so much better than it does now. Yeah. Everybody's free or 99 cents.
Exactly.
Everybody has thousands of books on their Kindle.
Oh, man, you even that, but I see like their box sets where it's like 25 books for 99 cents. I'm just like,
right. Anybody with a Kindle right now would not have to buy a book for 10 years and we'd all be entertained.
I mean, granted, we might all be dumber based on the quality of some of these.
Probably for sure.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that authors can do to market themselves and stand out and not rely on the publishing companies for?
Well, I think the first thing is still write a really good book. Because I do think if people don't respond to the characters or the story or the writing, it sort of doesn't really matter. If you're going to self-publish, I think series is generally the way to go. I know a lot of authors who do standalone, and a lot of readers tend to kind of skip. If a book doesn't meet their interest, they're not going to pick up a standalone. I think series really works. I also do think for self-publishing, more on the adult side tends to work more. I have a lot of authors who want to do like YA self-publishing, and I think YA struggles unless there's a big movie property behind, unless it's a Hunger Games or John Green or something. Genre fiction tends to still pretty much dominate self-publishing.
How much of that do you think has to do with kids wanting print books?
I think it's a big part of it. I also think just kids. I think there's so much more competing for their attention too. You're competing against video games. You're competing against Snapchat and Instagram and everything on Netflix and Hulu. I mean, kids, if they embrace an author, they are they will be fans for life. I've heard story, if you become a big YA author, you're the Beatles. But at the same time, it's really, really hard to, I'd say the customer acquisition price of a teen is probably a lot higher than it is on the adult
Well
side.
said. Yeah.
But at the same time, like if you hook a teen, they're going to tell all their friends and they're going to blog about it and tweet about it and come to the events and take videos and post them. Like they are going to go out of their way to let people know how much you are loved.
And that the print book is like a status symbol, carrying it around.
Oh yeah. I mean, like it's still, people do want that physical connection too.
So going back to your thing on series books, a question we get from a lot of people, and one we even struggle with ourselves, is let's say you write like a couple books in a good series. You're like, okay, this is doing well for me, but you want to write another series.
Yeah.
Or maybe some standalones. How do you juggle that without like losing momentum on the one that's doing well?
Well, I think you need to write something that's in the same wheelhouse. If you're doing really well in, say, like a mystery private eye series, and then you want to write a urban fantasy, there's a good chance you might lose some of that audience. But if you say, hey, I'm writing a mystery PI series, now I'm going to write sort of a, go 180 and now write a thriller series, it's still sort of in the same wheelhouse. Harlan Coben to me sort of is one of the benchmarks for having done this. He wrote, I want to say 5 or 6 books in the Myron Bolitar series, which were very much sort of standard private investigator, sports agent has to investigate more murders than any sports agent in history has ever investigated. And then he wrote a really kick-ass standalone. I think it was Tell No One. And so basically that book said, if you love the Myron Bolitar books, you're going to love this book. But if you've never read the Myron Bolitar books, you don't need to have read any of those because you're going to love this regardless. So I do think it needs to be in the same wheelhouse a little bit if you're going to switch it up and keep the same audience. Because if people are used to reading you in fantasy and then you switch to romance, they might not cross over a little bit. So I do think if you want to keep your audience, you do have to kind of give them a little bit of what they expect from you.
Now, one thing I've kind of gleaned from your Twitter account and stuff is you lean liberal, and
it's fun. Not as liberal as people think. Actually, it's more just anti-Trump.
Right. And so how do you see? And that is like a difficult thing. How do you? Thrillers are typically.
I saw it on Dave's list and was eager for this one.
Thrillers are typically read more by conservative people. I think anyway. I could be wrong. How do you break into that market and not alienate the hell out of those people?
Well, the Henry Parker series, it was not political at all. If there were politics in it, it was incidental to my political leanings. I've thought about that a lot, especially as a publisher, because I do worry that maybe if I'm as vocal as I am, they might not read my less me, but my authors.
Right.
They might say, "Oh, you're a liberal."
Right. Your responsibility becomes different. It's like I could be risky, but now that I have children and I'm not, a single guy, it's different.
It's exactly right. So that concerns me more than my books. Because listen, if I can say what I want, and if I sell less because of it, then hey, that's my decision. But if somebody says, "Hey, I don't like this guy's politics," I'm going to go to check out his company. Oh, I'm never going to read any of these folks because he publishes them. Then
they're all leftist communist bastards.
But the funny thing is, I'm like, a lot of our authors are. We publish authors across the political spectrum, and I have political, and we all get along. So the funny thing is, politically, to me, I'm not. I mean, I would say I am fairly socially liberal, but I've voted conservative and Republican plenty of times. I have more friends who have worked for Fox News than I do in any other network combined, and because they're good people. It's more. I think it's by virtue of having grown up in Manhattan, where I was born and raised a New Yorker, having seen Donald Trump for 40 years, knowing that he's a diseased con man. Like, I don't even look at it as Republican or GOP, because I think he's his own animal, and he disgusts me. So when people say like
a diseased con man,
we'll see you later, all of the conservative SPP.
But that's the thing; it's not a conservative Republican thing, because I likely would have voted for a different Republican nominee over Hillary Clinton, just not him.
Right.
So I think when people say, "Oh, you're just another one of these brain dead liberals," I say, like, actually, like, look at I'm not super liberal. I just don't like him. But anyway, thriller readers do tend to be a little conservative. And there's if you look at Vince Flynn and Brad Thor, and maybe less so David Baldacci, but those are very much political thrillers that have a point of view. And there's certain authors who skew more right than others. Brad Thor, who I'm friendly with Brad Thor. We follow each other on Twitter, and we ping back and forth, and he's a good guy. He's sort of more on the more right-wing thriller writer. Then you had Vince Flynn, who passed away a few years ago, who was definitely more conservative, but had less of an agenda in his books. I think Baldacci is actually more in the center. He writes about politics, but doesn't really give a political perspective on that. The Castle was the first book I wrote that really did have a political perspective. But at the same time, even though it was a political thriller, I didn't want it to be Republican bashing or Democrat bashing. I really wanted it to be just about the story and this character, and sort of like the antagonist, Rawson Griggs, is certainly a bit of a Trump type. I wanted to make it clear that if he came off as a bad guy, I was not extrapolating to say, oh, well, the GOP is a bad guy. The Republicans are bad, because that was actually part of the reason he's a third-party candidate, because I didn't want the book to be Republican bashing. And in fact, I make fun of Democrats in the book too. So maybe you can say I'm trying to have my cake and eat it too, write a political thriller and kill everybody. But it makes me hesitate more as a publisher than as a writer, because I don't want my political perspectives to prevent anyone from reading my authors. If they don't want to read me, so be it. I made my bed.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of us out there that are sort of centrist in we want to say stuff, but at the same time, we don't want to be viewed one way or the other, because people are so much in their bubbles that they're going to say, oh, you're right or you're left, and they're just going to avoid you. What advice you have, because you're active on Twitter and social media, what advice you have for authors, not even just about politics, but also about saying stuff and like being interesting, but not saying enough that you're going to get targeted by, either people against your politics or trolls or whatever. Right. How do you put yourself out there and not just get massacred?
Well, I think part of it is, especially over the last couple of years, as Twitter has almost become like a wind tunnel of madness. It's the authors who go on there, and there are a lot of them who go on there and just they pimp their books nonstop, and it's like, hey, check out this for 99 cents, or hey, check out this, or hey, check out that. No one pays attention to them. Right. Especially over the last year, where just like every day there seems to be like a dumpster fire of news. If you're an author, and this is actually there was actually a really good article there's a website called LitHub, which was founded by Morgan Entrekin, which sort of, I think it wanted to be a bit of like the Huffington Post for books, where just like a verticals and everything. They had, I think it was like 7 different writers write about what it was like to release and promote a book during the Trump era, when every day there was news and every day there was stuff going. Like, who cares about, oh, I'm doing a reading at my favorite little indie coffee shop, and meanwhile we're about to nuke North Korea. How do you do that? And the truth is, I think to build an audience on social media, you do have to be interesting. Not necessarily you have to, go in with a chainsaw and buzzsaw everybody, but
that's optional.
You have to say stuff that are going to get people interested. And not to say that you have to be political, but I think you have to be witty. You have to be smart. You have to be engaging. Or you have to write something long form for a website or a magazine to the point where enough people are going to link to. But I think the days of just sort of using Twitter as a purely promotional platform is sort of over. I think if you're interesting enough or funny enough or insightful enough on Twitter, people will then search out your books. Like Roxane Gay is a perfect example of that. Roxane Gay is this brilliant sort of novelist, essayist, and she's amazing on Twitter. And if you follow her on Twitter, you would say, I'd want to read her book because she's that good on Twitter. And not to say that everybody can do that, but I do think that if you want to use Twitter or Facebook or anything as a promotional vehicle, you have to do more than just pimp your wares all the time.
So another thing I'm curious to get your input on, because you've been in the traditional publishing world and you know a lot of the behind the scenes stuff. I'm guessing. I'm not asking for
No,
secret.
I was going to say, I know how the sausage is made, and sometimes it's kind of gross. So.
Well, mine's actually about Amazon Kindle Select. And a lot of people are really struggling with this, like getting in bed with this, with putting your books on Amazon exclusively,
Right.
ignoring the other places for the benefit you get. How do you decide as an author, or what do you tell your authors as far as the benefit versus the risk?
Well, we
Great
don't, as a publishing house, we don't do Kindle Select or KDP. We do full We're distributed by Ingram, both print and digital. So we have our books available on every platform digitally, and we get print distribution into most places. We're in Barnes & Noble, we're in Indies. And I think part of the reason for one of the big reasons for that is if we wanted to have any sort of print distribution, we couldn't go Amazon only. If we did Amazon only on the digital side and locked out Kobo and Google Play and, even iBooks and Nook, these bookstores wouldn't take our books. They would say, if you're going 100% Amazon, why should we support you on the other side? And I think by the virtue of the fact that I wanted us to have a robust print distribution, we had to make our ebooks available on every other platform. Myself, I actually did go KDP for the Castle, more out of curiosity, just because I wanted to see sort of how they did. And I got an article in Publishers Weekly about the Castle, and somebody on the marketing team at Amazon saw it and contacted my agent and offered me some like a little extra marketing bells and whistles if I did a Kindle exclusive. So that was a little appealing to me because it wasn't just going KDP and getting, whatever they give you, but it's also like, hey, we'll feature you on the mystery thriller homepage and you'll be included in some newsletter stuff. So that was a little different in that they offered me a little bit more to do that. But in terms of the publishing company, we do distribution throughout every ebook retailer.
I actually want to, you just mentioned your agent. So obviously coming out of the traditional publishing world, that's kind of the way that it's done. Indies typically don't have agents. Yeah. And obviously you're either all in or not, basically, if you're an author. But, Sean and I just went to the Austin Film Festival and talked to people who are hybrid authors and writers and filmmakers. And there was a panel with a manager, not an agent, but a manager. And it got me thinking about agents and managers. Could you just, I just wonder if you could kind of like run down a little bit of what you feel about that because most of us don't need an agent or a manager.
Right.
Just from your perspective, what are the pros and cons?
I think it depends on how, for lack of a better term, smart and savvy you are as a business person. Because if you're gonna be a self-publisher or go indie, you are a writer, but you're running your own you're running your own small business. And I guess if you're saying, hey, I'm going to throw my book up on Kindle or across the platforms and sit back and, that's wonderful. But there are a lot of other avenues that are open to you. So for me, I wanted to try to sell foreign rights. I wanted to try to sell audio rights. We sold rights to the Castle, to Tantor. We sold rights to my backlist to Tantor and audio. I wanted him to explore film. Also, if you are, for a lot of these places, if they're going to be contracts, the agents know that better than you. So it's to me, like, I've negotiated enough contracts that I could probably do it myself, but there are a lot of other avenues that wouldn't be open to just me because I don't know people in film. I don't know the audiobook producers quite as well, that I wanted to have a agency behind me helping out in that regard. And at the same time, I also want to have the option to go back to traditional publishing if I want to do that. And they just have much more of an ability to do that than I would on my own.
So a lot about connections and
yes, yeah, and especially if you are looking for any sort of traditional publishing deal, I would never recommend an author negotiate a contract on their own, unless they're a contract attorney or they have a background in it. An agent can save you or get you a whole lot more money than if you did it on your own. So I would always say an agent is worth it if you're going to go for a traditional publishing deal.
Okay. And you have an agent and a manager, or just the agent?
Just an agent. No, I mean, most authors don't have an agent and a manager unless they have a real speaking gigs lined up and stuff like that, or they're doing college campus tours and they need actual booking help. Most authors just need agents unless like a Michael Connolly where you have like a film series in development and TV series in development. But for most authors, an agent is more than enough.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Sean and I were looking at it through a slightly different lens. So I was curious about that.
Okay.
Go
Was there anything else that you want to talk about? I've run through the main questions I had.
I don't know. What do you guys have for breakfast?
Sports team.
No, actually, I will tell you. Funny, it's actually my birthday today, so I'll say that.
Oh, happy birthday!
Yeah,
And you're spending it with us.
I am. I mean, yeah, I am. Yeah.
That's a pretty terrible decision.
I'm already regretting it. So.
I mean, I hope that you are ending the show and going to have cake.
Yeah, I'm going out for dinner with my wife tonight. So yeah.
Okay.
So the Mark series that you're bringing back independently, are you going to continue writing that series?
I'm not sure. I would say maybe. That's very non-committal because I'm actually putting the sort of like the finishing touches on a potential like sort of a bit of a sci-fi thriller trilogy that I really like the idea for. So I kind of want to do that. But that said, like, as I was going through the old manuscripts and sort of reformatting and having the covers redesigned, I got a little bit of that, like, sort of that feeling like, wow, like I really like these characters. I really like these stories. There's, I think when I wrote them, I didn't think it would end at book 5. So there was sort of like, I kind of want to go back to this. Well, almost like what, do you guys ever read Dennis Lehane?
Oh, I love him.
Me too. So he wrote the Kenzie Gennaro books, and he wrote 5 of those, and they're brilliant. Then he wrote Mystic River, and he wrote Shutter Island, and then he went back to Kenzie Gennaro 10 years later. So I sort of, not to say I have to wait 10 years, but I don't mind the idea of writing 5 books in a series, putting that aside for a little bit, doing a few other things, and then going back and like, what are these characters like 10 years later? And I think that could be kind of interesting, especially because the character Henry Parker is actually a newspaper reporter, and that job is so much more different now than it was.
Right.
It was really only like 9 or 10 years ago when I wrote that first book, but
that's a long decade.
It's a long time. I mean, God, like Twitter didn't exist. Now, like if you're not on Twitter as a journalist, you're screwed. So, it'd be sort of interesting to me to go back and say, look at these characters 10 years later. How have their lives changed just because their vocation is completely different than what it used to be?
Now, are you a big fan of David Simon and The Wire?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love the last season with the journalism and all of that.
Oh, me too. Yeah,
Dennis Lehane actually wrote
the serial killer plot line was sort of a little too out there for me, but I love sort of like, and especially because David Simon had worked at the Baltimore Sun, and he's married to Laura Lippman, who's actually a friend of mine who writes a lot of great mysteries. And I think they met working at the Baltimore, and she actually has a cameo in the series, like a very brief cameo, Laura Lippman and The Wire, and this season The Wire. So like they knew the newsroom backwards and forwards. I love that sort of like little milieu. It's one of the reasons I love Spotlight. I love just the details and the nitty gritty of like just chasing down leads.
Yeah, I was a reporter for a few years, and like to me, David Simon is God.
Yeah.
Have either of you started watching The Deuce yet?
No.
I watched the first episode and I watched the first episode and liked it. I just haven't. We have a newborn at home too, so my pleasure TV watching is like 15 minutes a day.
Yeah, I was looking. I almost started it.
Is when you get up in the middle of the night, have a series. That's how I watched all of Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah, that's a good idea, actually. Yeah.
I wanted to watch the first one the other day, but the pilot's like 100 minutes. Like, who has 100 minutes for a pilot? That's terrible.
I just started watching BoJack Horseman just because at least it's like sort of short, but it's like
short and funny.
Yeah, it's short and funny, but it's also like if I wake up with my daughter, often will wake up at like 4:30 or 5 a.m. and like to watch that show, which is really sort of a bit of a mind bleep. I don't know if you can curse on the show. It's a bit of a mind.
Yeah.
Oh, please do.
Okay.
No one has ever said mind bleep on this show.
It's a bit of a mind fuck. To sort of like watch BoJack Horseman at 5 a.m. when you're still half asleep, it really is sort of like trippy. You're like, I just watched an episode where he goes on like a giant drug-fueled bender, and I sort of feel like that watching the show at 5 a.m. Like, where am I? What's going on here?
Well, I think I need to try that.
Yeah, like is my baby actually like a lizard?
I picked up on the fact that you said you may be writing a sci-fi series, so you're going against your own advice on.
I am, because I'm stupid. No,
Us too.
It's funny. It's one of the anytime you claim to be an expert in anything, and maybe I am, but like you say, it's always do as I say, not as I do.
Oh yeah, we're way better at giving advice than following it.
Exactly.
Yeah, we jump genres all the time. So.
Yeah,
and we've done it for years. Yeah. It's terrible.
Yeah, and it may work, it may not work, but at the same time, like I had an idea that I really liked, and I like the freedom of just being able to do that. And it's
just knowing what the reason that you're doing it, right? Part of it is for you. Obviously, you're trying to feed something creatively, and as long as the financial needs are being met in other areas, then let the art breathe.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, 100%, yeah. And maybe when this is done, I'll go back and write more Henry Parker books or sort of new thriller series, but at the same time, like, it's sort of, I can do what I want, and if it turns out that I'm not enjoying it, I'll stop. But this is sort of what I want to do right now.
So other than the Castle, which is on sale now for 99 cents on Amazon.
Yeah, it's in the Kindle monthly deal right now, so they dropped it to 99 cents for fall November.
Okay, so where would you like people to go to find you? What else do you want them to check out?
They can visit me online at jasonpinter.com. They can follow me on Twitter at Jason Pinter, and you tell me if you think I'm actually liberal or not. And I also say that I'm reissuing my Henry Parker thriller series. No politics whatsoever, just a really cool thriller series, and that should actually be out next week. And the books are just starting to pop up on Kindle now. It'll be available in ebook, paperback, and it will be available in audiobook, but I don't have the release date for that just yet.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for it was great to meet you, Jason.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate it. Thanks
for spending your birthday with us.
Yeah, if you want to keep me on
special.
If you want to keep me on for another 4 hours, I'll celebrate with you. We'll get a cake.
Wow.
Dave's tempted.
Sounds great. So thanks so much for being on. It's great to meet you. And everybody for listening. Thanks for listening to Self-Publishing Podcast. And we'll see y'all next time.
Thanks so much.
Cool. Thank you.